Welcome back to part 3, and the first thing we're going to be doing is adding some red wool bats to the top of our seagull's head to create his Santa's hat. So I've layered about 3 layers of the red merino wool bats that I've got here on top of each other, and then I'm just tacking it into place with my fine twisted needles here. So you don't really need to kind of felt this really firmly yet. We just want to tack it into place to see where it sits, and I want to cover around about anywhere between 3/4 and an inch down our head that we've created. So I'm just tacking it all into place, and then once I'm happy with the positioning, then I'll properly felt it down. So I'm just using my needles. I'm not going super light with them. And the other thing I'm doing is, as you can see here, I'm just kind of hooking those loose ends that are going downwards towards the seagull's head, and I'm just hooking them upwards to get a straighter edge. We're going to be adding some white wool bats around this later on anyway to create the kind of the fur around the Santa's hat, but I'm just doing this in the interim just to make it a bit neater, so when we come to add that white wool later, we don't have any bleed through, if you like, where you kind of get the red colour coming through the white wool bats. So that's why I'm doing that, so I've got a nice straight edge to work with when I come to add my white wool bats later on. I'm just going to tack it into place on the top of the head as well. And I'm just going to start really focusing on felting it properly now. And because I've got a lot of wool here, it's quite easy to get all neat. So you should end up with something that looks like this. So nice and tight, a nice firm felt. And then what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take some more of my red wool bats, and I'm going to create the kind of the bit that dangles down on the Santa hat. I don't know what you call it, the kind of the surplus of the hat, if you like. So I've got my multi-tool here, my 7-needle multi-tool with my fine triangular needles on my brush mat, and I'm just felting this red wool into a very rough triangular shape. So I've got a point at the end, and then it widens at the top, and you've got the kind of the rough edges, the fibres of the wool that are kind of hanging free at the top, which is what we're going to felt down. Don't feel like you need to make a straight edge here. Leave those fibres loose, because that way they'll blend in a lot more easily with the rest of the Santa hat. So I'm just felting that down initially, getting it all locked into place. Make sure it's nicely anchored down as well. And you want to have this hanging down the side of your seagull head. So don't have it kind of going over his face, because then you're going to run into problems later on when you come to add his eyes. So really make sure that it's kind of at the side or even slightly back from his head, just to make sure that you've got plenty of space later on to add his facial features. So once again, I'm just really felting this down into position. And don't worry too much about the join that you have, because we're going to make a bit more of that later. So I'm just going to place a bit more red wool on top, just to cover that top join, but I'm not worried about those side joins there, because I like to have that in place, because it really shows the kind of the crease where the hat's hanging down, if you like. So I'm just going to felt down this additional wool bats here, just to integrate everything together, and also just get a nice secure felt on everything, so nothing's going to come loose from each other when the piece is finished later on. So I apologise if I sound a bit nasally and a bit croaky. I'm still kind of dealing with this horrible cold thing at the moment. It just makes me feel really tired. I don't know if anybody else got this. I know loads of people that I work with are suffering at the moment. Anyway, I digress. So I've now got a length of my white wool bats. So I've got some white Shetland core wool here. Don't worry too much about it being sort of too nice, because we're just going to use this to create the kind of the fluffy edge of our Santa hat. So I'm just felting a length of it, which is about 1/2 inch around the bottom of our red hat here. And I'm probably taking it just slightly over the edge of the red hat where we felted earlier on, but not completely over, and getting a nice thick piece of the white wool bats here, so again I don't get any bleed through from the red that we've already added. I'm not felting this really firmly. I'm doing quite a light felt here, because I want to keep that fluffiness, I want to keep that thickness there, that softness to the white, so it really is different to the rest of the seagull head. So you've got that, you're sort of differentiating it, if you like. So the next thing I'm doing is I'm going to make a ball shape, And if you're not sure how to make a needle felted ball, there's a video just above at the top which will show you how to make a needle felted ball if you're very new to needle felting. But I'm just folding the white wool bats, the same wool bats I used a moment ago for the edge of the hat, and then I'm just felting it down again with my fine twisted needle pen. And I'm not making a tight ball. Again, I want to make it quite loose because I want to have it quite fluffy like you would with a Santa hat. So don't worry too much about it being super firm, but you do want to be sort of firm enough so that it doesn't unravel and so that it looks circular in its shape. So it's always good just to give it a bit of a roll with your hands as well, just to make sure that you're getting that spherical shape that you're looking for with your needle felted ball. So you don't need to take a long time with this. And eventually you should get to the stage where it's reduced in size and it's about the right size for you to add to your Santa hat. So I'm just going to give it another roll, and then I'm going to place it on the end of the additional red piece that we added, and I'm just going to felt round the sides. So I'm felting around the sides of my ball into the red of the hat and then into the head of the seagull. So I'm adhering the whole thing to the head of the seagull. You want to get it nice and secure. I don't want this to be loose because you have to bear in mind this is something that you're going to be getting out year after year after year. So you want it to be nice and secure. You don't want it to become loose because then it could fall off eventually, or it could become sort of stretched and things like that. Things that can happen to wool if they're not secured down properly, which is why I'm adhering it to the head. And I'm just giving that hat a bit more of a felt as well, just to get a bit more thickness around that fluffy edge of our Santa hat that we've created. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. The next thing I want to do is I want to think about where I'm going to place his eyes. So I'm just going to use my fingers here and press in some indentations, and you want to make sure that they're straight on so that his legs are facing out in the same direction that his eyes are, and hopefully it'll make sense when you see the whole seagull in a moment. But I've got some white wool bats here, I'm sorry, black wool bats, not white wool bats, that I've just rolled into a small ball, and then I'm just placing them into the little divots that I made with my fingers. And then I'm just going to felt that down with my medium twisted cross star needle just to get that felted into place. And just make sure that they're in the same location so they're equal. You want symmetry here. This is one of those pieces where if you don't have symmetry it can look really strange, so you really want to keep checking throughout the sculpture, throughout the making of the sculpture, to make sure that everything looks nice and symmetrical, just so it doesn't look odd once it's all finished. And it'll just bother you, trust me. You'll get really annoyed with yourself. Be like, oh, why is that eye in the wrong position? Anyway, so I'm just going to keep felting this until the black wool contracts in on itself and you end up with two small dots that are about 1 centimetre in their width and height. So I'm just going to speed things up here for you. I'm kind of going for, it's almost like Finding Nemo seagull slash, do you remember, I don't know if anybody who've ever watched Aardman animation films, the Wallace and Gromit films, and there was one, and I think it was The Wrong Trousers, and there was an evil penguin in it called Feathers McGraw. So he's kind of loosely based on Feathers McGraw slash the Finding Nemo seagull. Anyway, so I've got a white dot here, just using white Shetland again, and I'm just going to felt that into place again with my medium twisted cross star needle into the upper inner corner of my seagull's eye, just to add a bit of light reflection. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side with an equal sized piece of white wool. So just rolling it between my fingers, and then once it's rolled into a rough ball shape, I'm just going to place it in the same, slipped out, the same position as the first one, and then just felt that into place. And just remember when you're adding, when you're replicating the other eye, just to keep checking again to make sure that it's symmetrical, because it's a bit more tricky to copy the other eye exactly. So you just want to keep checking from a distance to make sure it's all looking the same as you go, rather than doing it all, not checking it, and then finding it's a bit on the wonk. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some yellow wool bats, and this is a merino wool bats again, and I'm just going to roll it into a Swiss roll shape here. Try and get it nice and tight, and the tighter you roll it, the less felting you're going to need to do. I'm going to take my fine twisted needles again, and I'm just going to felt that down initially to secure everything into place. And what you'll find is with that Swiss roll shape, you'll have a slightly thinner area where the wool is thinner, where you can felt into a point, because we're going to be making his beak now, you see. So I'm using my needles to felt this down, so I'm getting quite a firm felt here, and this is where you do want a firm felt because you want this to be quite solid for when you attach it later on. And I'm just felting it down, and then I'm felting this point with my needles, so just keep twisting it and keep taking it off the mat so it doesn't adhere to the mat as well as you're felting, and go for quite light stabs as well, and that way when you're stabbing through, you're not stabbing through to the other side of the mat, so you don't end up with a kind of a fluffy appearance to your beak. And then I'm just going into the back end here and just giving that a good stab as well, so I've got a good base to attach my beak onto, or attach my beak onto the face once it's completed. So just be careful of your fingers when you're doing that, and I'd recommend using finger gloves just to protect your fingers as well. So I'm just going to check the positioning and the size and make sure it all looks good. That's looking pretty good to me. He's looking a lot more seagull-like now. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some super glue. I've got my Gorilla Glue here, and I'm just going to place some of my super glue on the base of my beak once I can get it out. And then once I've added the super glue, I'm then going to attach that to the face. I could felt it into place, but I think you get a much more secure bond by using the super glue, and I don't think in this case it needs to be needle felted, so it just makes life a bit easier for you. It's a bit quicker, and you know you're going to get a nice strong bond there, and it's not going to come away. So I'm just going to hold that down, and I'm going to hold it into place for about a minute or so, just to make sure that it's nicely adhered to the rest of the wool, so it's not going to come away. So eventually it should be like this. And I'm going to just felt some eyebrows in as well, because I think they really do give a bit of personality to the seagull. So I'm just using my medium twisted cross star needle here, and I'm just felting in a normal arc like you would with a regular eyebrow. Sometimes I go for kind of an upside down rainbow, but today I'm just going for a normal arc. And I'm just using my medium needles to do that. And you want to get it quite thick, so I'd say you want to get it 2 lines thick, if that makes sense in terms of your stabbing, just so that it stands out once the sculpture's finished and gives him that kind of slightly surprised look. That kind of, ooh, what's happened? I'm on a tree. What's going on? I've got a tree up my bum. So now I'm going to make the wings. So I've got some grey merino wool bats here. I've actually got a very long fibred grey merino wool bats here, which isn't ideal for this. And you'd ideally want to get a shorter fibred grey wool bats if you can get your hands on some, rather than a long fibred, but I'm kind of working with what I've got here. And you want to create this almost like a teardrop shape, so it's going narrower towards the end on one end, and then it sort of widens out like you would see on a teardrop. So I'm just flipping it over and giving it a good old felt down, and you want to make a second one of these and get it pretty much exactly the same size as the first one if you can. It might be easier to make a template for this out of card as well, if you find that easier, just so you've got a bit of a guide as to how big you want it to be. But you want it to be large enough so it's about 1/4 of the size of the body of the seagull. So it's a good size, but it's not too big. But just go with what you think it needs to be, because the idea of the sort of wing size that I have might be different to yours. And then you want to point the wings downwards, so your wider part is at the top, and then your narrower part is on a slight diagonal going downwards, to the points going downwards towards kind of his bottom, if you like. And then once it's in place, I'm just felting that down with my medium twisted needles here. I'm felting around the edges first, because they're the most important area to get adhered down initially, so it's not going anywhere. And then once I've adhered everything down around the sides, then I'm just going to felt down that middle part. And the other thing with using a long fibred wool is you'll find you'll end up with lots of long pieces of fibre, which is what I found with this. So you might want to get your embroidery scissors and just snip away any loose fibres if you have that same problem. But if you're using a short fibred wool, you shouldn't have that issue, and you won't need to do that. So I'm just adding in the second wing now. And he's looking super cool, and I can't wait to pop him on top of my tree. I think he's going to look very, very cool. It's a very merry Kitch-mas to you all. So just getting that one nicely secured down so it's not going anywhere. And there we go. He's looking pretty cool. I'm just going to give him one last felt just to make sure everything's nice and neat and symmetrical. And there you have it. Your seagull is complete and ready for your Christmas tree. Very exciting. So I really hope you enjoyed making your festive Christmas seagull topper. I will see you next weekend with more festive Christmas needle felting tutorials. If you enjoyed these videos, please like them and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't had a chance to already, because I'm posting 3 days a week at the moment on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday with loads of needle felting hints and tips. But until then, have a wonderful festive week and I will see you very soon. Bye!